very much. It's great to be here. And it was a great discussion yesterday. I got the pleasure to be a part of some of the discussion yesterday. I was joking in the session on community and social services that I felt, gotta get this going. I felt like that. I felt like the lone corporate wolf, but it was a very forgiving crowd. Now I'm starting to think, coming up for the lunch discussion today, that I feel a little bit like the corporate patsy, and I'm now understanding why Karen invited me here to be this lone corporate speaking about where companies fit into this notion of community hubs. And the crux of the talk that I'd like to give, and hopefully the discussion we can have all together, is about really making the case for why companies need to be part of building and strengthening community hubs. Can I just ask, show of hands, how many here represent the corporate sector? So we got a couple over there, and a few over in the back, my brethren. I think that's telling, right? And I think that, reason I think I've been invited to speak today is not in any way to create this oppositional force or to call out, but is actually to say we need more companies to be part of this conversation, right? It doesn't make sense that when you're thinking about how do you improve efficiencies, how do you bring people together, how do we solve problems in community, and why space and collaboration is so critical to that, it's really, really important that we ask ourselves, well, what would the corporate involvement be? And I think it's important just to say at the outset that what we're not talking about is thinking about corporate in the old-fashioned way of the corporate sponsor that's this unlimited ATM machine. You just, you put your bank card in and out comes the money. Because companies, of course, are part of communities. They're made up of people. And they can provide so much. And part of what I want to sort of bring to bear in this discussion today is how they can bring so much to the table, not just in terms of money, but also in terms of reach. You think about the reach that they have in communities. You think about the people that they can deploy and the skills that they can help provide. You think about promotion and engagement. And all of that will ladder up to greater engagement and impact. And so, part of it is thinking about, through this lens, about how companies are also transforming. So part of this discussion is about where do we bring companies into the discussion of community hubs, but part of it's also about looking at and realizing that there's this necessary shift in terms of how companies need to behave. And what I want to show you a bunch of examples, that there is a real transformation happening in the world as it relates to companies. And I want to talk to you for a moment about why I think this is happening and how the relationship of companies to community is evolving, and how we're moving beyond just thinking about it in the old terms of maximizing shareholder value. And the most important thing I would say that's relevant to all of you is that the shift that we're seeing, and you heard at the outset about we trying to talk about this idea of profit and purpose, is that the leading companies, and it usually starts with the CEO, it's the leadership of these companies, and you're seeing a lot of emerging companies where they started with purpose baked at the heart, but most, of course, don't start like that. And when you think about CEOs who are now thinking about where does purpose sit, the most important aspect is that they truly believe that if they can define material community impact, that they could actually create better business outcomes. It's not one or the other, it's actually both. They materially believe that these things will make them better. So the question, of course, is if you buy that premise, and you may not, and I'd love to have that conversation about this sort of shift that's happening, where it's no longer just about maximizing profit, it's no longer about just being this good citizen giving back to community, but bringing these two things together. Why is this shift happening? And the first reason for it is that we live in this crazy digital 24/7 multimedia world. And what it's doing is that it's shifting how people behave, because you can no longer be the corporate raider during the day and then be this great philanthropist at night. You will be called out in a heartbeat. A great story I like to tell is there's a US company, they're actually a co-op called REI, much like Mountain Equipment Co-op, and they did a program called Opt Outside. They did a quite inspired thing following on the heels of Patagonia, and they said, we're going to close, too much commercialism, we're going to close our doors on Black Friday and Thanksgiving weekend in the US, which is obviously a huge shopping day and shopping weekend. And they got huge press for it, and they said, go outside, enjoy, right? There's this whole idea of nature deficit disorder, get outside. And they got incredible visibility for it and kudos for it. And then they went on Reddit, and they had the CEO, and they said, ask me anything. And they thought they were going to have all this groundswell of amazing continued PR until they had a bunch of former employees ask about their sales practices. And what was interesting about it is that you realize what you do on one side of the business today, you can no longer then try to obfuscate on the other side. And so in this immediacy that's happening in the world, it's shifting how companies behave. The second, of course, is that trust in business is down. Edelman does this trust barometer every year. And interesting enough, trust is down in government and trust is down in nonprofit for the first time across all sectors. People are less trustworthy. They don't feel like companies and governments, and to a certain extent nonprofit, which had never happened before, are delivering on what they say. But that trust in companies is shifting how a company needs to behave. Because if you don't have a customer that believes in you, obviously it's going to impact the bottom line. So they're asking themselves, well, how can this look different? And of course, the consumer is shifting the behavior quite a bit. The expectation of consumers today, and I won't give you tons of stats. We have lots and lots of stats if you want them. But there is a fundamental shift happening on how consumers think about a way in which a company behaves in the world. And the fundamental shift is they're very comfortable with them both making money and doing good. They expect them to be very transparent. They expect them, it's almost table stakes to be thinking about the impact that they're going to have. And polluting us with chemicals and treating our employees badly, that doesn't cut anymore. So the consumer expectation is driving it. And of course, these lovely people are also driving it, the millennials. 75% of the workforce in the next 10 to 15 years will be millennials. And their expectations of how companies behave in community, in their place of work, is dramatically shifting this idea of the consumer and the citizen coming together. And so when we think about community hubs, to not have companies at the table thinking about this, it sort of seems like a glaring miss. And I think there's finally also a recognition that governments can no longer deliver to the magnitude perhaps they once did because budgets are shrinking and expectations are even larger. And so as a result of all of this, we're seeing this blend that's happening in terms of embracing both a profit motive and an impact motive. And I think happily to say that Milton Friedman is wrong, right? That this idea that the only responsibility, social responsibility, is for a company to maximize its profits. It's all about the shareholder value. The shift that's happening now is that people are saying that doesn't cut it. Companies are made up of people. They live in community. It's not okay to separate these things. And so as a result, we're starting to see the difference. And this difference is really important to mark, that we are moving from the CSR, and you see the V over top of it, this corporate social responsibility, to what we would call profit or purpose, or what Michael Porter would call creating shared value. And I want to just take a second just to tell you what I think the difference is in this shift, because it's relevant to the conversation we're going to have about where companies fit in community hubs. So we still live in a corporate social responsibility world. There's no question about it. We still live in the world where companies basically make money and then they give back to community. And the giving back to community is seen as an expense to the bottom line. So when you think about your profit and loss statements, it's an expense. And we separate it. And sure, there's a bit of brand halo, but it's still a separation in the corporate social responsibility world. There's also a posture that's still somewhat a defensive one, because it's still looking at it through the lens of mitigating of harm. Maybe we have some products aren't the best. Maybe we pollute a little bit too much. Let's offset that, right? It's an offset. Social value is not the explicit goal of the enterprise. And you don't have, therefore, alignment within departments, within a company, in terms of how the business drivers and the social or community drivers, how those things come together. That's the CSR world, and we still live in that world today. But there is a shift that I'm talking about. And in the creating of shared value world, in the profit with purpose world, social value is the explicit goal of the enterprise. You actually have companies saying, how can we create impact in community? And we'll figure out how we make money doing that to drive our enterprise. And I'll show you a bunch of examples in a moment. But if you think about companies like Tesla revolutionizing not just electric vehicles, but you think about solar panels. Elon Musk is out to solve community problems. We can debate that, but I fundamentally truly believe that. So it's about social values and explicit goal. It's about factoring society into mainstream business decision-making. It's fixing problems, and it's seeing NGOs and governments as true business partners in the solution. And what's really important about it, of course, is transparency has to be key in this. Because the companies that aren't transparent, if you're Volkswagen and you lie, if you sexually harass your workers, like some of the things that have come out with Uber, it's going to hurt you. And so there's this shift that's happening, and what I think first of all, what it means for all of you. So one is, I think it's really important, and we can have this debate, that government NGOs no longer have the monopoly on solving community problems, right? This is a shared responsibility. And if you think about it, not having corporate truly to the table as a partner in solving community problems, when you think about where revenue is generated and what it takes to solve problems, there's much more capital sitting in the corporate markets. But it's not for companies to do it separate from nonprofit and government, it's to do it together. But you don't have the monopoly anymore. And when you think about consumer expectations and the consumer citizen, the younger set, the millennials and those coming up after them, actually are quite comfortable with companies solving problems without partners. And I'm not suggesting that's the right approach, but this is what's transforming it. And so part of what I want to leave you with is that if you think about if you embrace this point of view, that there is this merger happening, it provides an opportunity to tap into a real untapped opportunity with corporate. And as I said at the beginning, it's not just about the financial wherewithal, but it's the reach. It's the strategic and operational know-how. It's the people skills and deploying. It's the measurement evaluation that companies could bring to the table. It's the influence in policy. There's a lot that can be garnered if you bring corporate to this community hub discussion. And so I don't want you to take my word for it. I want to show you a bunch of proof points that maybe this thing actually is happening. And I wanted to start with one because I'm intimately familiar with it because we've been working on it. And it's about thinking about food insecurity in Canada with Maple Leaf Foods. And a lot of people I know were quite cynical and skeptical about this because how is a big protein processed meat company really serious about tackling food insecurity? But I can tell you that Michael McCain, with many discussions with him, is passionate about this issue. And the conversation and what we developed was asking ourselves, how could a big food company actually materially cut food insecurity in half? Because we looked at the Sustainable Development Goals. What would it take to find those really innovative programs that aren't just delivering food, but they're delivering skills and capacity to shift people from dependence to independence? And if we could find those true innovations and we could measure and evaluate the hell out of them, and we could share that and we could scale them, and we could use the brand reach and the pulpit of a CEO and a corporate leader like Michael McCain and really talk about and put this issue on the map and work with the community of organizations in the food sector who are on the ground every day delivering incredible work to address food insecurity, we might actually have a shot at cutting it in half. And so that is an example of something that's actually underway on how companies are thinking about and behaving differently in the space. I was trying to pull some examples that I think relate to the various ministries that are here over the last 2 days and are thinking about community hubs. So Canadian Tire, interesting example, obviously in the sport and thinking about access to sport and the impact of sport on kids. And they're looking at the disability file actually now on sport. So how does a big corporate, and you think about community hubs, I mean, Canadian Tires are in every single community. And the crazy stat is that most Canadians, almost like 95% of Canadians go to a Canadian Tire once a month. So where does that community fit in here? And how would you play to sport and access to sport with a company like that? I love what Google is doing around the impact challenge on disability. So when you think about the disability file, we had a little bit of this yesterday in the community social services discussion, and asking for and spurring, with, of course, with dollars, but also with know-how, how do we actually find those innovations on disability to create greater accessibility in communities throughout this country and throughout the world? It's inspiring what can be a part of that. I love this example. I'm not sure if people know about Eastside Eyewear. It's an Ottawa-based company, and they have a technology to restore eyesight. And it's a for-profit business with a complete social mission. So when I talk about profit and purpose coming together, this is a company making money, but to solve a social problem. And that's the old version. Supposedly the new one that's coming out, it's going to look very Star Trekian, and it's going to have, it will be much cooler than that. Indigo, I would say, is in the old model. But when we think about schools, when we think about education, we think about how libraries have been gutted in public schools. Well, where does Indigo fit in that conversation about the love of reading and thinking about, they have this program called Adopt a School. How does the community hub access that and bring them into that conversation in a way where they could extend reach? Starbucks, in my mind, is a very purpose-driven company for a whole host of things. And one of them is around the area of youth homelessness and employability. They're doing stuff in food waste. They're doing things around new immigrants. But you have Starbucks, and you have Home Depot, and you have Virgin all trying to tackle youth homelessness. And so where do they fit into the discussion about community hubs? We're all familiar with Bell and mental health being a huge, huge issue. Again, I would say that I'm showing you examples that go from the full integration of profit and purpose to actually ones where we're still kind of straddling the CSR world. Bell deserves huge kudos for what they've done in terms of reducing stigma around mental health. I don't think they've gone far enough in really thinking about how to create greater access to service beyond money and how they could use the reach of their business with communities, which is the biggest issue, right, is access to service and quality of service. But they're playing in the space. So where do they fit in this conversation? Cooperators, we're working with them right now around thinking about resiliency in communities. And as a co-op, and you think about the co-op movement, where does the co-ops fit in this discussion? Because there's many, many companies. I know Meridian is one we've worked with as well, and they're thinking about community stores and actually using the bank as actually a community center. So where do they fit? Foresters is actually trying to transform their business where they believe they're going to win on purpose. An insurance company thinking about how does purpose drive their business. And I love this example. This is IKEA. Unfortunately, they didn't do this in Canada, but this is an example of ingenuity where they set up, you're walking through your IKEA and you've got your big blue bag and you're going to get your Swedish meatballs. And then you've just come from the kitchen area at the tags, and then you happen upon a refugee camp. And you can't really see it, but there's all these tags inside, and it's actually to engage people. And of course, they asked for dollars. And they raised like $50 million in 2 weeks. But they found people in situ because people go to IKEA and they bring their families to IKEA. And so when you think about the reach of an IKEA and tackling the issue of refugees and settlement, and we're thinking about it in the context of Canada, where do they fit in that conversation? Because they're doing some really, really interesting things in the space. Tim Hortons, I would say, is in the old model of CSR, but it's still in community. I mean, they do that little smile cookie, and it raises $7 million for community. So how do we think about and actually create a more collaborative approach to how Tim Hortons shows up? Because they, again, in terms of retail, they're in community like very few in this country. So how do we play into that? Whole Foods doing incredible things across North America. They've got the Whole Kids Foundation, the Whole Cities Foundation, thinking a lot about poverty reduction, thinking about food insecurity. Where do they fit? You're familiar with Bullfrog Power. That's a profit, social purpose business, and we're thinking about energy, right? BDC, B Corp. So when you think about banks, and banks give to all of these issues, but when you think about BDC and growth capital, where do they fit? Body Shop. doing a whole platform on enrich, not exploit, and thinking about exploitation of people. And so you have all these body shops across the country. How does that fit? And then I want to just give you a few more US examples, and before I wrap up. Nestle is creating a whole new fusion of food and medicine through disease-specific nutritional products developed using clinical research, using their business know-how, using their product development to address specific disease with nutritional products. You've got Walmart, the big bad Walmart, who is working with the Environmental Defense Fund to identify ways to lower its conventional energy use and reduce costs. CVS, this is a retail pharma in the US. They decided a couple of years ago that they were going to transform and become a healthcare company. And they did an inspired thing. I'm not sure how many people know about this. They said, well, if we're a healthcare and we're about bettering the health of people in communities, how can we sell tobacco in our stores? So they banned tobacco. They're the first to do it. They took a $2 billion hit, and they made it back in 2 years. And now they're beating Walgreens by 50%. So they went into a full health platform, and they're scoring unbelievably. I mentioned Tesla. When you think about a purpose-driven business, I love the Grameen Danone and the yogurt that they've created to address nutrition in Sri Lanka and Pakistan and other countries. A product, they worked with the Grameen Bank. Listen, a really cool startup, beautiful headphones that's actually trying to tackle hearing aids and hearing loss, and how do you do that through a social purpose business. Patagonia, extremely well known, right, doing all kinds of work in the sustainability space, told on Black Friday to their customers, don't buy this jacket. And they sold 67% more jackets and other. That's the authenticity of a brand. You've got Dave Killer Bread out of Portland. Great product, by the way, where the guy went to jail, had this idea, realized that if he doesn't get a good job, he's going to end up back in jail. This is a bread company tackling recidivism in the United States, right? Where do they fit in this conversation? Good old Ben & Jerry's, right? They've tackled all kinds of issues over the years. Gay marriage, this was around climate change. They've even weighed into Black Lives Matter, which is interesting for them. But how could an ice cream company be your advocate in community? That's a crazy thought. Warby Parker addressing people who can't see and restoring eyesight in the developing world. Dove, you're all familiar with, and Real Beauty and thinking about self-esteem. They don't veer into sexual violence, but it's connected. And then finally, and I promise I'm going to stop now, you've got this crazy thing happening where all these big, bad equity firms are now investing in social enterprise and purpose, from BlackRock to Bain to Goldman Sachs. Right? It hasn't trickled down right to the community level, but it's coming. And you've got Unilever, who set up this foundry. It's a social innovation enterprise. And you've got Patagonia that set one up as well. And so I just want to leave you with by saying there's a lot happening in the market where companies are no longer just saying, we're going to run our business and then we're going to give back. They're actually saying, how do we create value? How do we actually help solve problems, and how do we do that in a way to solve our business? And so the takeaways that I thought would be helpful for all of you as you think about where corporate sits in this conversation is, what's it going to take for all of you to engage them well? And I'll leave you with 4 things. The first is, I really fundamentally believe that there's a need for a shift in mindset, both theirs and yours, right? A shift in mindset. At worst, let's stop thinking about corporate as an oppositional force, okay? And at best, let's actually think about it as a true partner. And in between, that's this idea, well, we can just get some money out of them. Let's stop thinking that way. There's so much reach and impact that they can be a part of it. But both sides, transformation has to happen on both sides. We need to shift our mindset. The second is, I think, fundamentally, you need to be very clear on the community impact. Oftentimes, when working with NGOs, I'll ask, talk to me about how the world looks different in 10 years on your issue. Don't worry about how much money it costs. Don't worry about what it's going to take to get there. Talk to me about the change. Talk to me about the measurable impact. And oftentimes, there's not a very good answer to it. And so if you're not clear about the measurable longer-term impact that you want to create with your community hub, how do you then know that the corporate X or corporate Y is the right partner for you? And why would they want to be part of that solution unless you actually know where you're trying to go and how they fit within your ecosystem? So clarity on community impact is critical to that. The third is around actually building in mutual benefit. At the heart of this idea of profit with purpose is reciprocity. There needs to be, the best relationships are where it's a win-win-win. And so how do individuals win? How do communities win? And how does the business win? How does everyone win in the exchange? How do you build that? Too often you have nonprofits coming to corporate and they're saying, I've got a great cause, we're in this community, we're doing this great project, give us some money, and we'll put your logo on it. That doesn't cut it anymore. So where is the win-win? And finally, if they truly are a partner, how are you willing to co-create and think much longer term with them to really come up with solutions together that are going to actually transform the community? And so I'll leave you with a quote that I found recently that I love from Shiza, hope I don't say her name wrong, Shiza Shahid, who's the co-founder of the Malala Fund, and now also at New Ventures, which is they invest in mission-driven startups. And she said, the best way to make money will be to create impact. And I love that, and I thought that's a great way to finish this discussion or this topic with you, because it is a brave new world, and I'm excited for the future, and I hope that as the big bad corporate here at the front, I've at least persuaded you a little bit to think differently about corporate, and I'm sure many of you are already there, and I thank you very much for your time.